The Temple Mount in Jerusalem has never been excavated, but an illegal construction project 20 years ago opened the door to some major discoveries.
For thousands of years, the Temple Mount has loomed as one of the world's most sacred and fiercely disputed sites. Legends whisper of hidden chambers and ancient mysteries lying just beneath its stones. Now, scientists have uncovered something that could change everything we thought we knew about this legendary place.
Temple Mount, a 35-acre platform in the heart of Jerusalem that holds thousands of years of biblical and prophetic significance.
Yet no one could have predicted that what lies beneath its ancient foundations would shake the very core of history, faith, and science. This astonishing discovery was kept under wraps for months, and what experts have uncovered doesn't just match the legends. It will leave you utterly stunned. Hit subscribe to uncover the full story. The Sacred Ground, a history of the Temple Mount. Jerusalem's old city rises from the hills like a crown of stone, but one part of it towers above all else, not in height, but in meaning. The Temple Mount, known in Hebrew as Har Habayit and in Arabic as Haram al-Sharif. This ancient platform of limestone and legend is one of the most sacred, most contested, and most mysterious pieces of land on earth. For Jews, it is the holiest site in existence, the place where Solomon built the first temple nearly 3,000 years ago, a temple said to house the Ark of the Covenant, guarded by golden cherubim and filled with the very presence of God. A generation later, after the Babylonian conquest and destruction, the Second Temple rose again, only to be destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. For Muslims, this is the site of the noble sanctuary, the spot from which the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to heaven during his night journey. The Dome of the Rock, built in the 7th century, still gleams from its central peak. For a time, it was even the first direction of prayer, or Qibla for early Islam. And for Christians, it is sacred by proximity, a backdrop to the life and teachings of Jesus, a place where he once overturned tables in the temple courts, calling for a house of prayer instead of a den of thieves. But beyond the visible shrines, this single hilltop tells a deeper story. One written in layers of buried stone and in secrets sealed away beneath centuries of war and worship, one that scientists have long dreamt of looking under. Over time, wave after wave of empires left their mark on the Temple Mount. The Persians who allowed the Jews to rebuild, the Greeks who desecrated the site, the Romans who raised the Second Temple, the Byzantines who built churches over it, the Umayyads, who constructed the iconic dome and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Crusaders, the Ottomans, the British. Each regime reshaped the mount, rebuilt its walls, and rewrote its purpose. Yet through it all, one idea remained, that this place was not just sacred, but special. Not just a holy site, but a place where heaven and earth touched. A site anchored by the Shekinah, the divine presence. In Jewish tradition, this refers to God's own indwelling spirit, which once rested in the Holy of Holies, hidden deep within the temple between the wings of golden cherubim. That belief has never died. It's said in prayers, carried in ancient texts, and echoed in the belief that surrounds the Temple Mount to this day. But despite the weight of history and faith, the mount remains largely unexplored beneath its surface. Religious and political tensions have prevented most scientific excavations, and only small projects, often limited to adjacent tunnels or unauthorized construction, have offered glimpses below. And those glimpses have been enough to suggest that beneath the Temple Mount, something ancient waits to be rediscovered. But that was until the late 1990s. So what exactly was discovered that year? The forbidden ground, why we've never dug here. Digging beneath most ancient sites is easy. You bring the tools, get the permits, and let the earth reveal its secrets. But the Temple Mount is not most sites. Beneath this sacred plateau lies the heart of three world religions, and with it a storm of politics, power, and faith so volatile that even a single shovel strike could trigger global outrage. Since the 1800s, explorers have been drawn to the Mount's deep, hidden past. British military engineer Charles Warren was among the first to venture into its buried layers, crawling through shafts, cisterns, and ancient tunnels beneath the city. What he uncovered, chambers carved into bedrock, water channels, and mysterious voids, sparked a tantalizing question. What else lies below? But Warren's finds came at a cost. Soon after his reports, religious authorities closed the doors. The idea of digging under the Temple Mount became unthinkable, because this was not just another archaeological site, but holy ground. No official, large-scale archaeological excavation has happened directly beneath the Temple Mount platform since. The reasons are as spiritual as they are political. In Jewish tradition, the Temple Mount is the holiest place on earth. The innermost sanctum of the ancient temple, the Holy of Holies, is believed to lie somewhere under the mount, and stepping onto that space unknowingly is strictly forbidden by Jewish law. That fear alone has kept generations of religious Jews from even entering the plaza. For Muslims, the mount houses the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. As a result, the Islamic Waqf, an authority based in Jordan, has maintained full religious control over the site for decades, and they have been fiercely protective. The arrangement between Israel and the Waqf is fragile. Any action seen as a threat to Muslim control over the site can spark violence, riots, and diplomatic crises. That's why, even when major discoveries are suspected, the area remains untouched. As one archaeologist said, digging here isn't just about history, it's about war and peace. But in the late 1990s, something surprising happened. During unauthorized renovations on the Mount, hundreds of truckloads of soil were dug up and dumped in the Kidron Valley just outside the old city walls. Just like that, thousands of years of potential history were scattered like trash, without records or supervision. Most would have let that soil disappear, but a group of Israeli archaeologists saw a chance. In 2004, they launched what would become one of the most unusual excavations in modern times, the Temple Mount Sifting Project. Working out of a public park in East Jerusalem, volunteers began the slow, careful process of sifting through every bucket of dirt by hand, piece by piece, year after year. And what they discovered was astonishing. More than 500,000 artifacts emerged from that discarded soil, showing 3,000 years of human activity. They found coins from Herod's time, Crusader-era arrowheads, and Islamic-era jewelry. This wasn't just rubble, it was history rescued by accident. And among those broken pieces were hints of something else, something older, something sacred. Researchers began noticing a pattern of items linked to ritual purity, worship practices, and inner sanctum tools. But what shocked them most was the abundance of First Temple-era artifacts, a period many had long dismissed as myth. It wasn't just lost history. It was proof that deep beneath the Temple Mount, a secret still waits, one that the soil could barely keep hidden. Treasures in the dust, forgotten objects from a holy age. The Temple Mount Sifting Project began as an act of rescue to save what had been dumped and ignored. But as the dust settled and fragments began to speak, the tone shifted. What researchers were finding wasn't just old debris, but a breadcrumb trail leading straight into the heart of ancient worship. A chipped piece of pottery, carefully cleaned, revealed a painted pattern dating back to the 8th century BCE, the First Temple period. Then more appeared: fragments of oil lamps, charred animal bones, pieces of ceremonial vessels. At first glance, these were ordinary archaeological finds, but then came something far less ordinary. A tiny, hardened lump of clay caught a team member's eye, flattened and cracked with age. It turned out to be a bulla, a seal impression once used to secure official scrolls. Examined under magnification, the ancient Paleo-Hebrew inscription became clear. It read, Gayali Yahu, son of Immer, an important name echoing across time. In the book of Jeremiah, Immer is identified as a priestly family active in the First Temple. This seal hadn't just survived, it had confirmed the existence of a real person, once thought lost to religious myth. And it wasn't alone. More bulli followed, some bearing names and titles that lined up eerily with biblical records. Others carried symbols like menorahs, temple gates, and priestly garments. They weren't forgeries. The dating was consistent, and the writing authentic. Gradually, it became clear these weren't just scattered artifacts. They were the shattered remnants of a priestly bureaucracy that had once operated on this very site. One of the most delicate finds was a carved ivory comb, its teeth still intact after centuries. Etched into its side was what is now considered one of the earliest complete Canaanite sentences ever found, referencing personal hygiene and perhaps even ritual purity. It was an everyday object, yet sacred by context. Then came tools more directly tied to worship itself. A small bronze incense shovel used in temple offerings, coated in the blackened residue of ancient aromatic blends. Nearby lay finely made jewelry that may have belonged to temple workers or worshippers, possibly lost during panic, war, or exile. Mixed in with these First Temple relics were items from Roman, Byzantine, and Islamic periods, evidence that the mount had remained sacred across generations, faiths, and empires. But it was the deepest, oldest layer that drew the most intrigue. Despite claims from some scholars and political voices that no clear proof of Solomon's temple had ever been found, a growing stack of physical evidence suggested otherwise. These items weren't just old, but specific. They matched descriptions of ritual duties, priestly lineages, and holy practices too closely to ignore. Each artifact pulled from the soil was another crack in the wall of doubt, another hint that this place, once thought to exist only in faith, had in fact been real, tangible, and active. As archaeologists studied the distribution of these finds, a pattern emerged suggesting they weren't randomly scattered. They came from a particular section of the debris, linked to something deeper, possibly an area that had collapsed or been hidden long ago. That pattern pointed toward sealed chambers and forgotten passageways that no one had entered in over 1,000 years. And that is exactly what they began to uncover next. The secret chambers beneath, forgotten rooms, reopened. Between 2021 and 2024, a new team of researchers began combining modern technology with old, overlooked maps from the British Mandate era. Their focus was the southern edge of the Temple Mount near the Western Wall. The British, Ottomans, and earlier travelers had long hinted at strange underground voids in the area, chambers, stairs, and hollow spaces, but for generations, those whispers had remained just that. Then, in 2023, the first breakthrough came. Since digging was still forbidden, the scientists relied on modern technology. Using ground-penetrating radar, the same scanning system used to detect hidden chambers in Egypt's pyramids, the team detected irregularities beneath the bedrock. They began to notice strange shapes and straight edges where nature shouldn't form them. The scans revealed what appeared to be sealed subterranean chambers buried under centuries of construction and collapse. They cross-checked the radar data with hand-drawn maps from the early 1900s made by British officers who had briefly explored parts of the Mount during the twilight of the Ottoman Empire. To their surprise, the outlines matched. The same corridors, the same blocked staircases, the same suspicious voids. The next step was cautious. Excavation near the western wall tunnels, just outside the Mount itself, was legally allowed and already underway. As workers carefully cleared debris from an old Herodian structure, they uncovered a partially buried staircase carved into the limestone. It led down into a forgotten antechamber. Inside, time had stood still. The chamber's upper walls bore Byzantine-era carvings of faded crosses, niche alcoves, and faint inscriptions. It was clear the space had once served as a Christian worship site, likely in the 4th or 5th century CE. But what lay beneath the floor was even more compelling. Digging just inches deeper, researchers struck a second foundation, older, much older. The base stones were massive. Finely cut ashlar blocks were carefully stacked with a precision style rarely seen after the First Temple period. They mirrored the same building techniques found at Solomon's Gate in Megiddo, a hallmark of ancient Israelite engineering. That changed everything. This wasn't just a Byzantine chapel. It was built on top of something far older, something forgotten. Stratigraphy and residue analysis confirmed it. This lower layer predated Herod's temple renovations, possibly by several centuries, and its placement, tucked beneath the mount, and aligned with biblical descriptions of sacred zones, hinted at a very specific purpose. Then came a chilling realization. A secondary staircase, half collapsed and filled with debris, trailed deeper, vanishing into sealed rock. It had been intentionally blocked, not by time or natural disaster, but by human hands. Someone long ago had wanted this place hidden, like a door meant never to be opened again. What were they trying to protect or conceal? The chamber's location, architectural style, and alignment with ancient texts all pointed toward one possibility. This had once been part of the inner sanctuary, or a pathway toward it. But they weren't ready to confirm that. Not yet. First, they needed more proof. And that proof would come not in the stone, but in what lay beneath it, the water system that shouldn't exist. By now, researchers had found enough to confirm that something sacred and ancient once stood on this mount. But what came next didn't involve ritual objects or sealed chambers. It whispered something deeper, design, something suggesting the people who built here weren't just worshippers, but engineers. While surveying the ground beneath the southern edge of the Temple Mount, the scientists discovered a series of interconnected voids. These weren't burial sites or storage pits. They were curved, precisely cut, and lined with a strange waterproof plaster. As they mapped the system, a pattern emerged. There was a vast underground network of cisterns, channels, and aqueducts carved into the bedrock itself. It shouldn't have existed. Carbon dating of mineral residue on the plaster layers shocked the team. These weren't Herodian or Roman. They dated to the First Temple period, roughly the 9th to 8th century BCE. But that wasn't the most surprising part. What truly stunned the experts was the sophistication. The system showed signs of hydrological planning far ahead of its time. It was designed to control flow, balance pressure, and store large quantities of water in a region notoriously dry most of the year. Some systems had narrow feeding tunnels that allowed runoff to fill reservoirs in a way that prevented stagnation. Others featured overflow ducts that redirected water to secondary chambers, ensuring supply without flooding. This wasn't just a utility system. It was sacred infrastructure. As researchers overlaid the cistern network map with ancient descriptions, something clicked. Several cisterns were perfectly aligned with locations mentioned in the Book of Chronicles, which described water preparations made by King Hezekiah and earlier kings to support temple rituals. One particularly large basin sat beneath a spot that, according to early Hebrew texts, once held the altar of sacrifice. This basin, lined with thick ash layers and faint traces of organic residue, showed signs of repeated use. It may have been part of daily priestly routines, such as ritual hand-washing, cleansing tools, and libation offerings. Its proximity to what would have been the temple's inner zones raised even more questions. Scholars had long assumed First Temple worship was largely symbolic and minimally organized, but this system told a different story, one of complex spiritual logistics designed not just for grandeur, but for precise function. And if the builders of the temple had planned its water system with this level of mastery, it meant they had also engineered everything else, from the flow of worshippers to purification cycles and the timing of offerings. This wasn't primitive religion. It was a machine of holiness operated with mathematical care. And the most important part, the aqueduct lines and runoff channels led the scientists directly to a specific area beneath the mount, an area that had just been reopened after over 1,000 years. What do you think about this incredible discovery? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.